Hello everyone, my name is Harshada, and in this video I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks for using breakpoints in Visual Studio. The very first thing I wanted to show is how you can insert advanced breakpoints from different parts of Visual Studio so you don't have to lose your context while you're debugging from different areas. The very first thing you can do is you can right click on this left margin and insert any of these advanced breakpoints with very fewer clicks. Or you can actually hover over this existing breakpoints and click settings to add additional conditions actions to your existing breakpoint. For example, if you are in call stack investigating any of your call stack, you can also insert a breakpoint directly from the call stack on the line number shown in the call stack window using this breakpoints right click context menu. Or, for example, if you are investigating any of your variables, you can insert breakpoints using this right click context menu again and insert conditional breakpoint, trace points, or a data breakpoint that is called break when the value changes. When you insert a breakpoint from any of your variable inspecting windows, such as locals, watch windows, or data types, it gets inserted where the variable is defined. So as we are talking about data breakpoint or the breakpoint called break when the value changes, this breakpoint can be really helpful when you wanted to keep track of any of your variable values. It can be helpful to know when and why the value changes during the execution of your code. Let me show you an example. So I am really interested to keep a track of this count variable as it only gets updated or incremented when a car with a specific price has been added to my list. What I can do is I can right click on that variable in the locals window and select this break when the value changes. This will add a new breakpoint in my breakpoint settings window, and it will also update a breakpoint icon in the locals window to indicate that the breakpoint has been added. Now, if I continue my debugging here, this breakpoint will only get hit when the count increases or when the count has been changed. And you have this friendly pop-up message in your editor showing the data breakpoint has been hit. It will also show you a previous value and the current value. And the best part is that in case if you wanted to add additional conditions or actions to your data breakpoint, you can do that using the settings on the right click context menu. Now, another breakpoint that can be helpful to keep track of your variables could be trace points. Trace points are very similar to log point, but the best part is you don't have to remove them when you are preparing your code for release. So trace points can help you log your status messages. It can help you log or keep a track of variable values, or you can also log certain information such as function name, call stacks using the specified keywords. For example, I have this breakpoint on line 72. I wanted to log the make and model of this particular car, which is added to my list in the output window. What I can do is I'm going to right click on this and select actions and then write a message called the car with make and model has been added to the list. And as I said, you can always use this $sign to add additional information such as color, address, or call stack or function name if you need to. Now, with this message added, this breakpoint has been converted to a trace points, as you can see here on this hover here. Now, if I continue debugging here, you will see a nice trace message which is logged in the output window. And the best part is I will not have to remove this when I'm preparing my code for release. So that saves you those release or log console.log errors as well. A lot of times when you add conditional breakpoints or trace points, and if you delete those by mistake, you will have to redo a lot of work. There is this very simple tip you can use for when you delete any of your breakpoint, and if you wanted to retrieve that is undo breakpoint. So the undo button on the Visual Studio works completely fine with the breakpoint as well. For example, if I delete this trace point by mistake, I can use this undo button to retrieve not just the breakpoint, but also all the actions and conditions associated with that. But it makes it very easy to retrieve your breakpoints, advanced breakpoints. So the next tip I have for you is if you often deal with loops, specifically with the larger data set. Sometimes when you are debugging your loops, and if you notice that your loop isn't behaving right after certain iterations, what you might have to do is you have to debug each and every iterations, and that might be a very long process. However, with hit count, you can actually streamline your debugging and focus on a particular or a certain iterations that might be causing an issue. Let me show you how. I want this breakpoint on line 63 to only hit when the for loop, for the fifth iteration of this for loop. That is because I noticed after the fifth iteration, the data was inconsistent. What I can do is I can go to settings and to conditions and select this hit count from this drop down. You can actually use equal to is multiply of or greater than equal to. And I'm going to do the number 5 here as I'm interested in the iteration after the fifth iteration. Now you will see this breakpoint has been converted to a conditional breakpoint with a hit count which is equal to 5. Now, if I continue my debugging, this breakpoint will only hit at the fifth iteration, successfully skipping all the previous iterations. So this is a very handy way to fast forward your debugging and save some debugging time. Another breakpoint that can be very helpful while you're debugging loops or while you just wanted to validate certain conditions or certain calls from your application, or you just wanted to validate if your code flow is working fine, is called temporary breakpoint. Temporary breakpoint is a breakpoint which hits once and then disables on its own. For example, I'm going to place a breakpoint on line 103 here. I just wanted to validate if this certain code here is being called correctly or not. So what I can do is I can go to settings here and use this disable breakpoint once hit checkbox. What it does, it converts this breakpoint to a temporary breakpoint. You will see the icon has been changed. And if I continue debugging here, my breakpoint will hit once and it will auto disable on its own. So I don't have to pause my application at this breakpoint in my later runs, but I can still use this later if I need to by just enabling it. Breakpoints can also be very helpful in the scenario when you are actually investigating a sequential event, or you are examining a function or a method which is called from a very certain part of your application. In that scenario, you can use something called dependent breakpoint. So with dependent breakpoints, you can activate your breakpoint only when a certain specified breakpoint is hit. So you don't have to pause again your application at every single run, but you can all actually focus on specified conditions or scenarios. Let's take an example again. I have this breakpoint on line 63 here, and I want this breakpoint to hit only when a car with a specified adjusted price is added to the list. I don't want this breakpoint to pause my application at other instances. So what I can do is I can go to settings and use this checkbox called only enable when the following breakpoint is hit, and then make this breakpoint dependent on breakpoint on line 89. Now, if I continue my debugging here, you will see this breakpoint is disabled. And let's continue our debugging here. Now, this breakpoint on line 63 will only get hit when the breakpoint on line 89 is hit. As soon as the breakpoint on line 89 is hit, this will get enabled, and in others, it will be disabled, so I don't hit my or pause my application here. Now, we saw that breakpoints can be really handy tool when you are debugging, and it can definitely help you fast forward your debugging or improve your debugging speed. But certain scenarios, you don't want your breakpoints to hit. You just want it to get at end of the breakpoint, end of the application and see the results. In that scenario, you can use something called force run to cursor. So force run to cursor is very similar to run to cursor, but the best part is you not just skip the line of code, but you also skip all the breakpoints and force trans exception. For example, I have this main method here where the final cars list is created. So what I'm going to do is at the end of this method, I'm going to do force run to cursor by right clicking and telling my debugger to run at this particular cursor location. And now with this, you will see my debugger actually executed this cursor location and skipped all of these line of code here and as well as the breakpoints. And it also gave me the final result which I was interested in. So this definitely helped me fast forward my debugging and save some debugging time. The very last tip I have for you is disabling breakpoint on shift click. We all know that when you click on any of the breakpoints on this left margin here, the breakpoints gets deleted. But in the scenario when you wanted to just disable the breakpoint, what you can do is you can hover over it and do shift click. And this will help you to disable breakpoint instead of deleting. This could be a really handy tool as well while you're debugging. Those were all the tips I have for you related to breakpoints. Hope those were helpful and help you improve your debugging experience. Thank you so much.